I think I would always tell the TSMC copper story, the copper interconnect story. Who on earth is going to be interested in copper wires? In Silicon Valley, they're much more unconstrained, right? In Taiwan and Hsinchu, I think the people are older, a little more grizzled, a little more pessimistic, that they're always thinking about cost. Right now, it doesn't matter so much that that some area is more or less cost than others because that was because of the situation, the geopolitical situation. So I think they need to implement more of that. And they don't like it being told that, but they know it. A supplier or a solution provider going up to TSMC and saying, hey, you need to do this, that's not going to end well. That's a big cultural challenge for them to adopt. They're hardware people, they're not software people. China and Taiwan have been at odds since 1949. At some point, you just have to live your life. The consequences are unthinkable. The people of mainland China are extremely hungry. They're extremely hungry, extremely poor. They're extremely smart. And I think there's something really intimidating about that. Moore's law is dead. Reverse materials development from artificial intelligence.
Wow.
You wouldn't be an Asian country if you didn't have your own fab effort. That is an incredible story. That's an incredible story about innovation and a story about making certain decisions that have lasting consequences within the industry.
Join us as we welcome Jon Y, the compelling voice and founder of the renowned Asianometry YouTube channel. Transitioning from a decade in Silicon Valley to Taiwan, Jon launched his platform in 2017.
He masterfully delves into the intricacies of semiconductor manufacturing, history, and technology, explaining the why behind industries. With an impressive 800,000 subscribers, his work consistently bridges the gap between complex engineering concepts and broad understanding.
Get ready to explore his unique approach to technology storytelling and the evolving landscape of global industry. Let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome back to the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Salah Nasri. And whether you're an industry veteran or someone that's just curious about semiconductor manufacturing, this is your podcast. Before I start this discussion, I would like you, yes, you right there. Looking at the back end, we've had more than 100,000 views, but we only have just about 3,000 subscribers. So click that subscribe button, because the more subscribers we get, the more interesting, and my basically promise to you all, I will work effortlessly hard to make sure this is a fantastic platform for you to learn from. So, without further ado, today's a very special day. I'm here in Taiwan, in Taipei, and it has been an absolute pleasure during the pandemic to watch an incredible YouTube channel called Asianometry. It is absolutely fantastic. The things I've learned watching this channel I don't think I'd have to spend a lot of time in the library to be reading all these books to understand the history of science and semiconductors. It is a fantastic YouTube channel. And if you've not subscribe to it. Anything that you want to learn about our industry, that is one of the best, maybe from my perspective, and I know the guest is in front of me today, it is the best YouTube channel out there. If you want to learn the true dynamics of semiconductor manufacturing, science, and genuine history about the industry and many other industries as well. So, without further ado, short introduction. So, Jon, originally from Anaheim, California, moved to Taiwan after spending a decade working in Silicon Valley. He started the Asianometry channel in 2017, initially focusing on travel and hiking videos. And over the time, he shifted towards topics he was passionate about. And these topics include history, and then later technology and our beautiful world of semiconductor manufacturing. So ladies and gentlemen, yes, without further ado, Jon Y is right in front of me. Jon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's kind of feel very embarrassed.
Why?
Saying so many nice things about me. It's very unusual to hear.
You deserve it. The numbers speak for itself. I mean, Jon. Look. As of early 2023, Asianometry had nearly 400,000 subscribers. Right. That's a big number, mate. My job is collaboration. And part of collaboration, I do this through our events. And I've been to many other events as well, exhibitions. And, the number one event may attract maybe 100,000 people, which is hosted in China. But your show's got 400,000 subscribers.
800,000.
800 now, geez. So that's what I'm saying. Early 2023 is 400, now 800. So it's doubled. Wow.
Crazy.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. That is remarkable. Not only that, if the audience may not know the crazy statistics behind Asianometry, 3.4 million hours of content was watched in 2022 alone. Did you know that?
Wow. That's way too much.
People, I don't know whether people were bored or whatnot, but I think people learned a lot. That is remarkable.
Yeah.
Other than the YouTube channel, Jon, what else do? You got the newsletter, Asianometry newsletter?
And then, I also have the very small podcast, Transistor Radio, which I do with Dylan Patel of Semi-Analysis.
Yes.
Doug O'Loughlin of Semi-Analysis, and I think China Talks Jordan Schneider shows up sometimes as well. It's very fun. It's very infrequently scheduled, but, it's very fun to do.
That is the challenge with I would say the podcast business is, or the podcasting, you've got to be consistent.
Oh, yeah, it's number one. Number one.
That's the number one secret to being successful in this game. Even myself, I try. I remember when I first started this podcast 6 months ago, Jon, it was just like the followers were just going up and up and up and up. And then I had a spill where I had to go into like world business travel in like January, I think, or for January and February. And then I can see the momentum has just become stagnant because I'm not posting every week.
Yeah.
So I think that's the real secret. It's okay. One day, give me a couple of years, Jon. I'll be at 400,000. I think consistency. Jon, I want to go in a little bit just to clarify and understand the purpose of why. Why did you start Asianometry? How did this come up?
It's kind of like one of those things where I was kind of burnt out after working so long in Silicon Valley. I wasn't like anything special. I was more like just a guy on the street, and kind of was trying to figure out what to do with my life. And then I decided I was like going to go to Asia, and it wasn't quite clear where. So I decided that I was going to take 4 different cities, send applications to both, all 4, and eventually picked a job in Taiwan simply because they gave me the best offer. And when I was there, I kind of was really interested in kind of showing people around. It was just kind of this really new environment. And I had my mother flew in. She's Taiwanese, and we had a trip in Japan, and she asked me, you're doing all these things in Taiwan, and I don't really know what you're doing. So I was like, hey, Mom, you know what I'm going to do for you? I'm going to start a YouTube channel, and I'm going to show you kind of my life there. I did like maybe 5 or 6 of these, and then, no one really watched them, but my mother did. My mother was extremely happy. But eventually you run out of things to visit. There's only so many statue parks you can visit. And so I thought to myself, hey, look, I'm going to, kind of move more. It's not a difficult transition to go from kind of talking the history of a particular statue park or some nature thing to going into kind of more detailed things that you see around, like history and stuff like that. And then when I think the thing you notice is that in Taiwan, you can never kind of get away from semiconductors, from TSMC. And I think it's like even prior to the pandemic, it was something that even the aunties in the cafes kind of talk about
it.
I know, yeah, they know about it. They talk about it all the time. You hear it constantly. And so, I was eventually just like, what is this company that they keep talking about? Like, why do they keep talking about this company? And so, that's when I started covering it. I started kind of talking about what their things are doing and stuff like that. And I realized I didn't really know much about semiconductors. And my father, fortunately, was in the business. He was an analog chip designer.
Where?
National Semi.
Wow.
And then he worked at a few other smaller companies. I think and then after that, he kind of explained a little bit to me about how things were, and kind of went from there. And it's been a fun journey since.
And life in Taipei. You're here, we're here together. How does living in Taiwan, center of the global semiconductor supply chain, shape your research and storytelling?
I think being in Taipei actually doesn't really help you that much with semiconductors. You need to be in Hsinchu.
Yes.
And I think that the biggest problem, my biggest regret early on, is that I didn't make more trips down to Hsinchu because, in Taipei, a lot of tourists come here, a lot of like global corporate stuff happens here, but like the semiconductor stuff is always out of town. And I think one of the challenges for myself was that like I didn't go out there enough, and I should have spent more time there and learn more about the people, because the people are very open about what they do, and I'm very open about the work they do. And I've only really started doing that in the last 3 years or so, just reaching out to people, talking to people, meeting with them, and kind of learning more about what the life of the industry is on their side, right? I cover a lot of the stuff is the science and the engineering and the marvel of semiconductor manufacturing. But I think the thing that I didn't really sort of, that left me kind of itching to know more about the actual day-to-day life of semiconductors. What do people who actually work in this industry think about what's going on around the world? And I think that's been that's been something that I kind of been trying to learn more in the past 3 years. Unfortunately, what they tell me is all in confidence, and I can't really I can't really be specific about it. But like it's really been a really interesting learning industry experience for me, because you read something in a book, or you read something in history, oral histories and stuff that's not really the same as talking to someone who's like an R&D manager at TSMC, and he's telling you exactly what's going on.
Right. Is that part of you? If you don't mind me asking, from a blueprint point of view, when you put these remarkable videos together, do you talk to an R&D manager from TSMC, for example, to get insight, or how does that work?
It's sensitive, right?
Okay.
Because they can't really tell you. They're not going to tell you about their recipe, but what they can tell you is like the science of it, what's been going on, and there's the trend of the industry. A lot of things that I've kind of recognized is more helpful is like being guided to what is the current running thread, right? And I think within the industry, the fascinating thing about semiconductor industry is that you have running threads that kind of spread through the whole community, and they're trying to kind of solve major problems. They're coming up with solutions with major problems. Those solutions are coalescing as a consensus amongst the major players, and trying to get a handle of that is challenging, right? And that's kind of something that I really like kind of sniffing out and learning more. Because a lot of this technology is cool technology, it's really cool, but does it become commercialized and become part of the fab? That's a different question. I think learning that question is a lot more intriguing for me.
So, having experienced both worlds, Jon, what is it that you've seen as a key differentiator? So, from a macro semiconductor economic perspective, I don't know if that's a term, I've just invented it. Silicon Valley is known for the greatest design house on earth, design houses. And Taiwan, there's no place where they build fabs in the world in terms of efficiency and leadership. What's the differentiator that you've seen, and why are they shaped in these specific areas? Of course, in Taiwan, you still have some of the biggest fablet. MediaTek is one of the largest IC design houses in the world. But the majority of the IC design houses, AMD, NVIDIA, Broadcom, and etc., are in the Silicon Valley area. What have you seen as the traits why that is the case?
I think it's kind of interesting, right? Because it's like in Silicon Valley, there's more. I've told some friends this, but they don't believe me. But it's like in Silicon Valley, they're much more unconstrained, right? They're younger, they're more energetic. I think something about software, that realm just really lets you feel like you can do anything, right? Of course, there's limitations, there's things you have to deal with and stuff like that. The code doesn't run, but like it's still, you have a blank canvas that you can build off of. In Taiwan and Hsinchu, I think the people are older, a little more grizzled, a little more pessimistic. They're constrained, right? They have immovable, irreducible physical laws that restrain them from doing something, right? That's the law of the physics itself. And I think that's like, they are constantly thinking about that. And the second thing I also notice is about people within Hsinchu is that they're always thinking about cost. That's a TSMC thing. They love to talk about cost. They don't talk about the possibilities of something. They talk about, is this good for the cost? And I think like just seeing these different attitudes between these two areas, it's really fun. Because in Silicon Valley, they're all about what you can do. What is the future? What is the possibility? AI has really energized everything. In Taiwan, they're like, well, you still got to make these transistors, and these transistors there's like no leeway. And how much are you going to pay me?
Yeah. Jon, defining Asianometry for the listeners out there that are unfamiliar with the channel. I've tried my best at the beginning to explain what it is. What is Asianometry's core mission, and how do you choose which topics, semiconductors, computing, Asian history, to tackle?
It's kind of fascinating because it's like what Asianometry always wants to cover is kind of the processes or things that are affecting the technologies and trends you see in real life, right? I don't really like to talk about, I don't like to sit with someone and be like, oh, AI, super intelligence, what's that like? What is that future like going to be like? Are we all going to like float on hoverboards? I like to think about more why certain technologies exist the way they are. I like to think about why industries exist the way they do, how they're structured. Talk about economic, political, and like physics principles relating to that. I like things that are actually real. I like things that are here. So I cover a lot of that. I cover a lot of kind of these sort of major trends in our world. And as for like why a particular video over another, I think it really depends on kind of, is this moving out of a phase where everyone's just doing kind of like science press releases, right? Is this a lab experiment or is this real? Yeah. And I think for me, that's the question I always ask. I think, I want to ask this as regards to, it's a reason why I would do a video about, directed self-assembly rather than 2D semiconductors, right? There's a difference. One is closer, right? That's the reason why I do glass panels rather than, some other random thing. And I think it's like, I like to study those things because they feel like there's something, it's on the way.
Right. From your target audience, when you went into you went from travel to semiconductors and history. How did you have in mind a target market audience?
No, I didn't really think about that. I think really what I knew what it was for is for myself. Okay. And I'm wanting to learn something that I'm kind of interested in knowing about. And I'm willing to put in a lot of reading and to get to scratch my itch. And I've just, the funny thing is just there's a lot of people who find that somehow they're kind of aligned with what I'm interested in. Yeah. And they're kind of following me as well as I do my best to explain how this all works. And I think, I hope they just, I know that not everyone will have the same interests as me. I've definitely been told that I do too many semiconductors. Yeah. And I've also been told I do too few. So
You can never please anybody, my friend.
Yeah, you can never do everyone. So it's like, it's kind of, it's fun, but it's one of those interesting things.
There's a great phrase by Steve Jobs, and he's got many great phrases, but he says, if you want to be a nice leader, sell ice cream. So you can't please everyone, right?
Right.
Awesome. So from idea to hundreds of millions of views, was there a particular video or series that catalyzed the channel's rapid growth? And from that perspective, what lessons did you learn from that breakthrough?
I don't really have like a series that really broke through. I think an interesting one that really taught me something, that I had something real, was the video about Chartered Semiconductor, which is the Singapore Fab.
Seen it.
And that was
that's how I found out about you.
Yeah,
it was that channel. It was that episode.
I know, right? I did that video, and I'd done a few semiconductor videos as well before that. But then, they kind of wasn't. It was like up and down, because I was always trying to strike that balance between being. I didn't want to be, glossy and whatever, like business, very shallow stuff, but I also didn't want to be a college lecture.
Yeah,
because those aren't interesting either. So I wanted to. So then when I did the Chartered story, I put that out. That was the first video I felt that I was really satisfied with what turned out. First video that kind of was like saying, hey, I'm going to put some more effort into chips, semiconductors, and fabrication technology and all that, and the economics of fabs. And the response wasn't amazing, but it was good enough for me to think I think I really enjoyed it. So I was like, I kind of feel like I should kind of do more. And the funny thing is there's I did drafts for 3 to 4 more other fabs, because in the 1990s, all kinds of you wouldn't be an Asian country if you didn't have your own fab effort. Malaysia did one, Vietnam did one, Hong Kong did one. They all had their own sort of interesting, not Hong Kong. Hong Kong, those are a transit for it was registered in Hong Kong. But there are all these different different economies that all had their own fabs, and not all of them succeeded. And I had the idea I was going to go through each one of these companies and go through each one of them why they failed. Fortunately, that would have been exhausting, so I didn't do it. But wow, it was really fun. But then I knew I was going to do other semiconductor videos after that. That was kind of when I kind of say, all right, let's do this.
Not many people know. Yeah, so that Chartered Semiconductor Fab, if you look at today's TSMC team, they all came from there.
Yeah.
CC Wei was at Chartered Semiconductor Fab.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
CC Wei came out of the Chartered Semiconductor. There's a lot of great TSMC executives that were at the Chartered Semiconductor Fab. That fab has created legends.
It did.
In the game.
It's kind of interesting if you look at TSMC's leadership.
Yeah.
They're not lifers. You know that?
Right.
They're long there. They've been there for a while. But
elaborate what you mean by that lifers. They didn't dedicate their whole life to the company. I know I have very close friends at Intel, and they were there from the beginning all the way till now. Even at Bosch Semiconductor out of Germany.
Right.
Or Infineon, it was Kimonda, but they were there till the end.
Right.
So that's an interesting analysis that you've got there. They're not all lifers.
Yeah, they're not all lifers. There's maybe one or two that you can point to saying they started and at TSMC and they're still there. They're very senior. But a lot of the senior people, they weren't there almost the whole beginning. They've been there for 10, 15 years, but they haven't been there forever.
Intriguing. What I'd love to know from your perspective, I mean, like I said, the Chartered Semiconductor, that was an awesome episode, by the way.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. What was the most intriguing story in semiconductor manufacturing that you would prioritize as number one out of all the stories? If you have to take one story with you and you could repeat just that story to anybody you met with, which one would it be?
It's always been, I think I would always tell the TSMC copper story, the copper interconnect story. There's something special about that one. I knew that it was a story about copper interconnects in general. And I knew I wanted to tell the transition from aluminium to copper. And I think that was going to be a difficult story. And I thought to myself, like, who on earth is going to be interested in copper wires? Who will ever be interested in that? And then, like, as I dove through the story, I went through kind of how IBM came up with it, and all the other companies kind of followed through in America. But then I was like, you know what, TSMC actually did their own iterations as well. And I think, like, that kind of transitioned into a story about TSMC and how they did their own R&D. There was like, it's a famous story here, right? The 7 or 8 R&D nights. And they still tell legends about it to this day amongst the old TSMC retirees and lifers. It's really fun. And it's kind of like, that is an incredible story. That's an incredible story about innovation, an incredible story about self-generated R&D, and a story about, like, making certain decisions that have lasting consequences within the industry, right? The whole copper interconnect story plus the low-K dielectric is super amazing. And that's, that video ended up really well. I was really happy with it. I still remember it. And it's like, I personally, that's the one I want to take with me.
Yeah, awesome. You know what? It has to be made clear, because people will assume, like, I don't do what you do. It's top class. So I took a year off sabbatical due to health reasons. And I actually felt kind of unfortunate due to that situation. I left my job and etc. And I wanted to keep, I still wanted to keep in touch with people.
Right.
So the way I decided to keep in touch with people in general, I decided to create these like mini stories about the creation of a certain company,
right?
Whether it be TSMC, Intel, ASML, whatever, but very bite-sized chunks, just to keep in touch with everyone,
right?
And what really caught me off guard is the amount of effort that goes in to creating these videos. Like, the research behind it is number one. The recording, sometimes I'll have the mic and I'll say something, I'll mess up and I have to start again,
right?
Go back in the beginning,
right?
The editing and etc. And your videos are known for dense research and clear explanations. I would be interested if you could share with us, if you could walk us through the end-to-end workflow from topic selection, sourcing, to scripting, and then post-production, because you must put insane hours per episode that you do.
Yeah.
I mean, how many hours would you, in average, do you think you put per episode?
Nowadays, a video would probably take around 20 to 30 hours per, and I do 2 videos a week. Not always, but that's my goal.
It's a full-time job. In European standards, it is a full-time job.
It is my full-time job now, but it used to be, up until I think last year, I actually worked my old job as well. So I would get up at 6 a.m. I would work on the video, and then I would take a bus to Nehu, where I work until 7, 6, go home, eat dinner, and then work until midnight, and I would go to bed. So I did that for about, 6, 7 years of the first years of the channel. And the reason I left my old job was because I really liked my old job. It was really fun, but I really missed talking to people and, the social interaction and solving problems. And so, but like in the end, it was just too much. It was too much work. The channel, generally, the idea, it always begins with an idea. And the idea can come from something I've researched, or come from some other thing I was doing, or come from a recommendation from a viewer or a reader. I'm working right now on a video about wireless standards, and that came from one of the inventors of the standard itself, who reached out to me. And I interviewed him and kind of read through all the documents and go through oral histories, newspapers, primary documents, stuff like that. And I think you lay it all down, put it in a big outline, and then you start writing around it. And then you stop when you decide, like, you've actually scratched the itch, you're finished with the story, or like, you just too tired.
Yeah.
But, then from there you start collecting the materials, and that takes around 5 to 10 hours. And then the recording, editing is actually pretty easy because I just throw it into a final editor. But then the actual recording and the collecting the materials and making sure that everything's kind of all, up to what I'm up to standard is that's around 10 or 15 hours as well. So, it's just a lot of time and effort and like a lot of sacrifice, I would say. I'll probably not be able to do it forever, but like at some point but it's fun. It's fun while I do it.
Do you see about how AI can help you out with that?
I think the problem with the AI stuff is that like a lot of it is not correct when it comes to technical stuff, right?
It's true.
Just ask ChatGPT to generate a gate-all-around transistor. It'll be so wrong that like if you look at this, you'll be like, it'll disgust you. And I think like I've not found a really good flow for AI that really makes for a video that I think that makes me happy. What I would use AI for, this is what I use AI for. I use AI for translations. Like if it's in Chinese, I'll translate it to English. I'll use AI for transcribing like a table, and I use it for writing references. So I'll screenshot a document. I'll say like, can you write a reference for me? Because I can't be bothered with that. So far, it's very limited AI. Hopefully it'll get better, and hopefully it'll be good. But so far it sucks.
Yeah, you have to feed it. You have to train it, unfortunately.
The funny thing is, like, I was doing a video a couple weeks ago, and then I was researching, and then I was saying like, it was actually about MediaTek. I was doing a video about MediaTek, and I was researching MediaTek. I was like, did MediaTek do this and this? And then it sourced my video. It said Asianometry, Jon Y from Asianometry said this about MediaTek. And I was reading this. I was like, I don't remember saying this.
Wow.
And I had another hilarious thing. I had a guy from India or something. I don't know where. He emailed me to say, did you ever do a video about why India is not a superpower? And I was like, no, why? And then he said, because I just had a conversation with Gemini, and Gemini claims you did that video. You said why India is not a superpower. And Gemini even laid out an outline, the thesis, a whole video. And he sent me the whole interaction. I read it and I said, this is not a bad video. But it's like, that's not me. I did not do that. And the guy actually had to email me because he was so convinced he didn't know. He couldn't tell. He had to reach out to me directly. It's amazing. AI is crazy now. Really crazy.
And it could say the wrong things about you if you teach it the wrong things to say.
I don't even know. Did I teach that?
That's amazing.
No way.
That's amazing.
It was a very coherent argument. I legitimately wondered, like, did I have some sort of like, wow. Yeah. It was fun.
Wow. So talking about that then, if we discuss about the balancing of like breadth and depth, this is a great point actually. I mean, how do you maintain accuracy? That's and depth while you're keeping that videos engaged for a broad audience? That ranges from like a student to a housewife maybe to someone that's actually in the industry.
I think it's actually like, when I started out, I really was careful about, I'm still careful, but I make mistakes all the time and I try to correct them when I get them. I think the thing that I want to always be clear about is like, I want to know the broad technology and I want to know implementation but I don't need to know steps, right? So I want to make sure that the idea is correct. And I'm willing to kind of spend extra time, even though I know it's going to be a pain in the butt later, but it's like spend extra time to explain that. And I run that through with experts who I know. Nowadays, that's what the flow would be. When I started covering ASML and TSMC and semiconductor fabs, no one talked to me. No one wanted to say hello. So like I had to basically be very clear about what I was actually saying, which means that sometimes I would gloss over things, right? If I'm not exactly clear, not absolutely clear, just explain the intent, right? Explain what came out of the box and leave the actual box a black box. Over time, I've gotten to be a lot better to understand and fill in how those various parts of the box works. And I think that's been, I look back on the videos I used to do a couple of years ago, and I still kind of cringe because it's amazing kind of how much I didn't know about semiconductor manufacturing then and now. It's amazing.
Do you have a physics background or electrical engineering background? Or do you study it?
No.
You're like me.
No,
You're just like me. I learned it from scratch.
Right,
During the job.
The surprising thing is a lot of people at TSMC and other companies, they don't have it either.
No, I just did a remarkable podcast with a good friend of mine who is the corporate vice president of advanced packaging at AMD. And it surprised me that his degree was in like metallurgy.
Yep.
Iron and steel. And now he's running the advanced packaging of AMD. It really is an industry that just catches you by accident.
Yeah. And it's kind of interesting to the verticals, right?
Yes.
A guy in lithography will have so little knowledge of not saying little, but he'll be like, man, I don't really know what's going on with deposition, right? Or the guys in deposition will be like, man, I don't really know what's going on in inspection. I think it's really fascinating how you have these verticals within the semiconductor industry that they don't really quite interact with each other. It's really fun.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So I would love to get your insights, Jon, on key industry trends. And, you've covered, chiplet architectures I've seen in your episodes. You covered lithography races, supply chain geopolitics. That's a really interesting one that you've done. From your perspective, which semiconductor trends or inflection points are you watching more closely now?
I think there's broad trends, right? Industrial wise, there's very broad trends as regarding to innovation moving from, it used to be about processes. It used to be about kind of energy related things. And I think what's really interesting is that when I look at the research now and I go to the conferences now, a lot of talk is about materials. A lot of material talk. New materials are coming online. A lot of new materials relating to all parts of, for example, they'll take a lithography process or a deposition process and they'll say, what's new about it isn't necessarily that it's a new idea or new procedure. What we're doing is we're changing the material.
Yes.
And I think that's kind of these are generational changes. And I think this new focus on materials is really interesting to me because a lot of that is, material discovery and material work right now is something that's been a lot of focus in the AI world. And I think materials, not saying that that's going to connect to each other, but I think that's just really fascinating to think that seems to be where the demand is. I hope that made sense. And the second thing that's really interesting to me relating to the geopolitics is obviously kind of the determination of where factories need to be built is now no longer dependent on the economic cost. And I think that's a reversal from a trend that's been going for a couple years or a couple decades, actually. And I think right now it doesn't matter so much that that some area is more or less cost than others because that was because of the situation, the geopolitical situation. That was a trend, I think, followed by the Japanese, I would say, in the 60s and 70s, and it did not end up very well for them because when that sort of trend reversed, right? So it's interesting to see how much of the semiconductor industry will move to that, will make that decision, but on a technical level, it doesn't really they don't really talk about it. There's not something they discuss. It's something they throw on the side. Say, well, we have to kind of consider these geopolitical conversations. I don't know how that's going to turn out. That really depends on kind of trends that change day to day. So we'll see how that ends up. I think the last thing that's really interesting to me is that the there is a lot of focus on kind of implementing new forms of automation within the software side of the company. But the processes are running up against, TSMC and all these other fabs are very conservative. They're so conservative that they still haven't implemented certain forms of machine learning, like not even neural nets, like machine learning. They'll look at that and be like, I don't really know if I can rely on that. And I think that's something that a lot of these companies need to either accelerate or they need to better understand that. I think that's a big cultural challenge for them to adopt. They're hardware people. They're not software people.
Yeah. Do you see that as a possibility from a point of view of progress, as a halt in a progress? As in, because at the end of the day, you see, why is NVIDIA so ahead of all the other design houses?
Mm-hmm.
It's because they've mastered the bond of hardware and software, right? The hardware is top notch, and CUDA is just remarkable, right? Do you see it as that's being the key problem on a broad basis?
It's a problem for TSMC, and I'll tell you why. Because TSMC has to hire 8,000 new people every year in Taiwan to account for expansion or attrition or something like that. The issue is that there's not 8,000 new people coming out that are actually worth hiring.
I like what you said, that not worth hiring. Because I know Taiwan graduates a lot of electrical engineers, right? But high quality, but even if there wasn't high quality, even if they weren't caring about quality, there's a birth rate problem here. So it's and even if they imported all these people, they couldn't. So Taiwan, TSMC, and the other fabs will need to be somehow update their processes to include more automation. That's just necessary. That's not a geopolitical thing. That's an economic thing. That's a profitability thing. That is a realization of running this company. So I think they need to implement more of that, and they don't like it being told that, but they know it. When you talk to managers there and they talk about how they do things, it's so manual. Why do they not like that?
They don't like being told to do things. They're just they're.
Do you think it's an ego element, or just we like to do it our way and we don't need to listen to anybody else, right?
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. No, it's not like they've been number one for that long. But within Taiwan, they are used to telling other people what to do, right? And they use that to their fullest advantage, right? Just talk to a TSMC supplier. Who wears the pants in that scenario. So I think a supplier or a solution provider going up to TSMC and saying, hey, you need to do this, that's not going to end well.
So it's interesting you say that. We work with several automation suppliers, well-known companies, and also upcoming, very disruptive solutions and effective. And they said to me that when they go to a TSMC fab, that you'd be surprised to know that they still use spreadsheets.
Yeah.
And that shocked me.
Yeah. I'm not even half surprised because they are so, especially with imagine Fab 3 or something, Fab 2 or something, super old. They're still carting around the wafers and
seen it with my own eyes.
Yeah. And it's and you're looking at that and thinking well, this can be more technology. Can you add more technology? But who cares about that, right? Yeah. We're talking more about on the leading edge. Even there are certain parts of the leading edge where they need to invest more in the software part of that, and the software and automation and bringing in more of the AI stuff. And I think that's my own opinion. That's not theirs, but they look at that.
When do you think it becomes a reality check that things must change?
There is none. That's the problem.
Because they're way ahead of the game, I think, in comparison to all the other fabs around the world or foundries.
I think technology-wise, no. But I think what they do is that they do the other part of the foundry business very well. They do service very well. They're very reliable. When they say the chips come out, the chips come out, right? They do that very well. Intel, for example, you might say that they do technology leadership really well. But there's always, they're going to have delays, and they're going to have, sometimes promises might not always what they'd be kept. So I think I don't know if if TSMC will always adopt every new technology that come across their way. And honestly, sometimes you need to kind of cast that for them in a way that's very stark. It has to be related to cost, right? Yeah. And I think they need to change those attitudes over time.
From a storytelling complex process discussing about technology, what strategies do you use to make, let's say one would say, opaque technical subjects like EUV lithography or DRAM roadmaps understandable and compelling to non-engineers out there?
I think it's very hard. I think you have to think about it as, my go-to strategy is to imagine a hero's journey with the technology as the hero. What is the problem that your technology is trying to solve, and what is the obstacles that they have to overcome? And I think you have to you have to start at the beginning. You start at the great problem that is facing all the people, and then you bring in the technology as a sort of potential savior. You go through the obstacles that they have to kind of defeat to kind of get acceptance. Then eventually you have to find some sort of, you really have to anthropomorphize, is that the right word? Anthropomorphize this technology. And that's how you get them to get ordinary people to just really vibe with it. And that's my reflection on it. I don't always follow that sort of structure, but it's it's very kind of, in my opinion, that's the best way to work. Because you can't always do this for every technology. That's the problem. And some technologies are just not interesting. And that's the tragedy of it. I've always recognized that genetics technology, I've done 4 or 5 videos on genetics technology, some of the best, my favorite. And I recognize that that's not what the audience wants to watch, even though I really love it. It's just not what they want to watch. It's kind of I still don't get it. Even maybe electrical people, technology people don't think biology is a technology. So I don't know.
Could it be that maybe it's, like I mentioned, knowing, or are you aware of who your target audience, who your audience is? That's not easy to identify. Having hundreds of thousands of subscribers, you don't know where they're from, or what they do, or what industry they're from, or do you have a sense of what type of audience that you are attracting?
I have a sense of it from the basis that I look at videos that are successful, right?
Okay.
They kind of tell me. Right. I don't really, it has to still be interesting to me. A lot of things that I get asked to cover that I never want to cover because I'm not interested in it. But what within those interests get chosen is determined by what people actually like. I think it's some famous cook, he said that it's you don't really get to decide what makes you popular. It gets popular because people like it. Yeah. So I think that's sort of the key insight from me. I let the audience tells me what they like, and I think that's a good credo to follow.
If we look at the, let's say, Asian industrial development process and the narratives, because what comes out of Asia is very unique narratives, as one would say.
Right.
Why do you think that Asia's tech industrial stories are underreported? And how do you decide which country or company histories to spotlight?
I think it's really fascinating for me because a lot of these companies have their own structure, they're built within a culture, they work within a certain culture, and a lot of these are very young. They're much younger. There's not, you don't have a company that's founded from the 30s or something. The TSMC was founded in 87. A lot of the whole technology industry in Taiwan kind of started maybe in the 50s or 60s, right? I think compare that to AT&T or General Electric or Boeing or something. They all started many, many years before. Yeah. And I think that's kind of gives you an opportunity because a lot of this has been so well documented. But the interesting thing, the flip side is that it's not documented in English. It's documented in another language, or it's documented in some in some kind of like some travel log or something, and I think that's digging that out is kind of interesting. And I find that it's really fun to cover a company that you've seen before. Maybe they've done some import stuff. Maybe I did a video about YKK Zippers, right? Like I never heard of YKK, except in the context of I just see this on my zipper.
Right? The Japanese, right?
Japanese, yeah, that Japanese company. And you ended up following that, right? Like that's sort of kind of when you see these Asian companies and how they've sort of permeated through people's lives, everyday lives, not only in Asia, but outside of Asia, I think like that's really special. And I think that's covering that is sort of underrated because a lot of people don't really do it. And I think like for various it's not in Japanese. They don't read Japanese, they don't read Chinese, they don't do that sort of stuff.
How do you do your research? I mean, that is so random, like YKK Zippers, which is brilliant. Like they're the best zippers in the world, I think. Without how they're everywhere, right? Like, how do you do your research on them? Like, where do you source the data for YKK Zippers?
That is a tough one. That was a very tough one. The founder left a memoir. He has a kind of like not like a memoir. It's kind of like a book,
like a journal,
a book. So what I worked on was the story had 3 different parts. The early parts, I went to the library. I think the number one thing is that you go offline. If you can't find it online, you go offline and you go through libraries. And a lot of the old semiconductor textbooks that I did, all in text, like paper. And then in the case of YKK entering the United States and kind of becoming prominent there, there were court cases and U.S. trade group discussions regarding to that. So you kind of weave the story between there and like you can work your way backwards from there, and there are gaps and you have to fill the gaps, or maybe you don't if it's not necessary to your story. But it's sort of it's not that easy, but it's fun.
Wow.
You go deep. That's what I need.
Yeah.
That's the end point there.
So if we're going into historical context for modern tech,
right?
Could you share an example where understanding decades old industrial policy or historical events that have basically provided surprising insight into a current semiconductor issue?
No, I think like everyone should go back to like the 1980s, right? The 1980s and 70s of kind of the DRAM threat so-called from Japan. And I think like Japan, a lot of the playbook was kind of written from there, and a lot of the kind of the geopolitical tensions now we see in other parts of Asia were first experienced in Japan. And I think seeing how those Japanese companies responded to that is something that I think is illustrative of what might happen in coming days. One of the things is that like when you look at Nissan, Toyota, and the car makers, right? They built factories in America, and I think that's one of the major things that kind of had to do in response to kind of political tensions and about imports. That's just one small example, but like there's other parts of that are also just as interesting. Japan worked on a government-backed project to kind of advance its semiconductor industry, right? And the interesting thing about that is that when you look back at it, when you read the newspapers, they talk about the Japanese government funding this sort of massive movement to overtake American leadership. You see many of the same phrases repeated back then. But when you actually read what they did, is like, I was told early on is like this VLSI project of the 1970s was the thing that helped Japan overtake American semiconductors in DRAM. Well, when you dive deeper into the story, it's much more nuanced, right? Like they didn't actually do anything related to DRAM. They looked at certain parts of lithography that weren't even related. They looked at X-ray lithography and not UV, not photolithography, just X-ray lithography. And I think like an electron beam a little bit. And And the whole thing was only like $6-8 million. Like, that's not that much. Then you kind of tie back to what actually was happening. And I think, like, the American DRAM industry at that time was very fragmented and very weak, for very low profits and no funding support. So, like, you kind of go through the story, and I think you learn. I think looking back on what happened back then really helps illustrate for you what's happening now. And I think, like, are we in a hysteria now about certain parts of Asia's capabilities in semiconductors that maybe 10 or 15 years from now, when the data does come out, and you look at it and you look back on it and like, wow, like, maybe we shouldn't have been so crazy about that, or so wild about that, or made these assumptions, or did these policies with these assumptions that we thought that we were going to be. Like, did we really, are we so sure that AI supercomputers are going to create, world destroying things that are going to kill us all? I don't really, like, they were starting to talk about it back in 2023, but 2 years later, do we still believe that? Somehow I don't think so. So I think, like, a lot of that, it gives you deep perspective, I think. And I think that's kind of really helpful and illustrative, because, it helps you make a more clear-headed decision about what you want to do in this world.
I agree. One of the interesting histories from our industry that came to my attention was when you look at the chip crisis, right, and that happened in the pandemic. I did not know, and it came out of the blue, because I'm currently writing a book.
Yeah.
The Tamagotchi. Do you know that story? Maybe you might have to do that story. It was one of the first situations whereby there was a chip shortage.
Really?
Because of these Tamagotchis.
Wow.
That's it. You got to do that episode, really. You do.
Just to say the word Tamagotchi.
Just Tamagotchi. Yeah. Apparently there was like a situation where they just couldn't get enough silicon.
That's hilarious.
They couldn't get enough chips. And there was a point where, like, the Tamagotchi was like, you could buy them off the shop for like $20 or $30. And because of the chip crisis that happened at that time, they were like $400, $500 a pop. People were selling them.
Hilarious. I love it. I love
and you look at that situation, it actually replicated in the pandemic time with cars. Second-hand cars were more valuable than first-hand cars.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I think it's really good to go back to the hysteria and go with that. Like, I think I was told by someone that, like, you need to go look at what this one time you had this massive shortage when this one factory in Japan blew up, and now we can't make semiconductors. Well, I went back to that. I looked into it, and then it was like, it wasn't like they said. What actually happened was that a epoxy factory had a fire and had supplies interrupted for 8 months, but it was only 30% of total supply, and 70% was still going through. And I think 20-30% was actually sourced out of the United States, and only some less than 40% of semiconductors actually use that sort of epoxy for packaging, not fabrication, packaging. So I think it's just very, very. There's a lot. The thing about semiconductors that really makes me so irritated about outsiders is that they say something like, TSMC is like Dune, right? It's chips are the spice, and the spice only comes from this one island. That's just marketing. This is hysterical marketing, or not even. It's an anti-marketing, and it's like, it's also not true. And I think, like, going back and sort of taking that apart and seeing what is the actual situation, I think that's very informative, because it really drives hysterical responses when you have hysterical information coming in. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, full on agree with you. So where do you see then, John, Asianometry heading over the next 3 to 5 years? Are you going to have new formats? You're going to do a podcast like this, for example, or deep dive reports, or perhaps a book like myself?
I think I would love to do like a video podcast one day, but the thing I learned, and you didn't ask, but like you might be wondering, why am I not showing my face? And it's like, I don't show my face because you can never have that back. Like, I actually don't mind being seen around, but I've met other people who are known, and it's just very annoying for their lives. And it's like, I just don't want that in my life. I'm a very low key person. I don't like to go around, and I know that. I think what will probably happen is that I'll continue running the channel for the next couple of years. I'm really determined to get to 1 million, but then after that, I think it's very slow down. I think one day it'll just stop, and I'll just move on with something else in my life. That's kind of how all things are, But I'll probably maybe do a podcast, do a little more casual stuff, like more talk show kind of thing. But I do 50 to 80 hours a week on the channel, and I already had burnout issues from 2 to 3 years ago, and it's pretty bad now. So I try to keep it low key, and someday it will slow down, and someday it will stop. But there's a beginning and end to everything, right?
Yes. What goes up must come down.
That's right.
And in the stock market, if it goes down, it might come up. Depends on the tariffs. So when you look at evolving platforms is another key thing.
Right.
It could be, the way YouTube is doing things is changing.
Right.
Spotify is now becoming really interesting now. Apple Podcasts is okay.
Right.
And then you've got shifting algorithms, different media formats. How are you planning to adapt your long form, heavy research style?
I think in the end, what's going to happen is that the number one thing is that you have to build a brand of people who follow you kind of no matter where, and will follow you to other platforms, because I think that's important. That's just a marketing thing. That's just a brand thing. I think also it's important that is to have diversity, right? And I do have the newsletter. I do have a audio feed. And eventually, I think the one thing maybe I don't do is short form TikTok.
Yeah.
But that's something I just despise. But I think number one for me is just to recognize that I have things I like to do, and I want to work on that. And I want to make sure that people know that if they come to Asianometry, they're getting a certain thing, and I hope they like that thing, and I hope they enjoy it, and I hope they can resonate with it and resonate with me and my interests.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's would help me continue with that as long as I want to do it, till one day I decide I won't.
Are you driven by passion, would you say?
Yeah, definitely more. I don't make this much. I don't make that much doing this. I make far less than a regular computer engineer. So I do this because I love it, and it gives me some flexibility, and it definitely has to be passion, because it ain't money.
Yeah. I mean, you must be getting reached out for brand deals or sponsors.
Yeah, but the problem with brand deals on YouTube is that you got to give up something.
Right.
You got to give up your. I love my brand deals that I've done. I've done a few. I've done very few, but it's it's part of the business, but it's for me, it's sort of you have to be very, very careful about who you take on, because they see it as an extension of themselves.
Right.
So your audience sees the brand as an extension of you partially. And if you pick a crappy brand or someone that really disappoints something, you're partly responsible for that.
Right.
And that's a burden for me that when I see that, I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe, I hope that I'm not tied to that. So it's a concern for me, yes.
When you talk about your anonymous perspective, you being anonymous on that perspective, what's that? I mean, Asianometry, you don't put your face on there.
Yep.
So is it only when you're doing public type of discussions like we are doing right now that you prefer to keep that anonymous perspective, or?
I think it's kind of
because the brand Asianometry is recognized.
Right. People recognize my voice.
Wow.
They'll stop me on the street to say, are you
serious?
Yeah. It happened. But luckily I can just shut up and no one will hope. My goal in life is to not really be bothered too much. So it's like, I could definitely, and you can't really go back if you are unanonymized, right? Like if you go show your face, everyone is like, then it's gonna create a hustle and bustle, and like then everyone will know what you look like. And also one thing too is 6-8 years ago I was a lot skinnier. So like I remember I was looking at pictures of myself, and as I was going, I don't want to see myself aging on the channel as I like watch this videos. I'm like, oh my god, I was like, I don't want to be. It's a hassle.
Yeah.
Why do we hear my voice aging?
It really, it's interesting you say that. I've realized when I look at pictures before, I used to have more hair here and no hair here, and now I'm losing hair here and hair's going here.
Yeah.
But one thing is interesting is that we are kind of in a kind of similar fields, just different perspectives or different ways of approach. Our goal is to promote collaboration, to educate, to motivate, to inspire, right? The interesting thing is like in the semiconductor industry, I could go to an exhibition, for example, or a conference or whatever, and people will most likely know who I am. But the good thing is it's only in the semiconductor industry.
Right.
If it was on another type of perspective, but I would say from the top of my head, or if I was to relate to yourself, having 3,000 subscribers in comparison to 800,000 subscribers, that's much more different. That is a different perspective.
It definitely is.
And that is where you have to be kind of cool. I would not, with all due respect, I would not want that. With my face out there. If my face was hidden, I wouldn't mind that. But if the face was out there.
I attend a lot of conferences. So like I attend a lot of sessions, and it would be more inconvenient if I showed up and the people would recognize me.
Right.
Because I'm just trying to get work done. I'm just trying to learn what it is. I'm just trying to see what they're doing. And it's just kind of like, I'm watching. So like, I just don't want to be, The helps being in Asia and being Asian, where like, no one could tell who I am. I'm walking down the street. But, that's how it is.
So all right, I want to talk about geopolitics.
Sure.
Right. Tell you something really interesting. Last year I came here. Actually, sorry, not last year. When did Taiwan open up? 2023 I was here.
Yeah.
I had to do 3 days quarantine, I remember.
I remember that.
And not so fun. That was not so fun. But on the taxi there and the taxi back, taking several taxis, and I would ask the question to the taxi driver, I'm like, how's the situation between China and Taiwan? I am not kidding you. Some people generally got a date fix. They predicted, they say 2027, China will invade Taiwan.
Right.
They've got that number specific. How does that make you feel?
I think it's kind of like what President Xi said was that he wants the army to be prepared for an possible invasion by 2027. I think that sort of got spun out to actually saying there's going to be an invasion in 2027. I obviously I never like talking about this because obviously I live here, my family's here, and all that. Generally, what I try to say is kind of like let's try to avoid war, and a war would be war or invasion or all of that would be terrible for everyone involved. And I think like there are Taiwanese working in China on the mainland, and there's mainlanders here too. And I think like maybe relations hasn't been so great between the two sides in recent years. Part of that is related to politics within Taiwan. But like a lot of that is related to kind of also other things that are happening between China and the United States.
Right.
So like I generally kind of just say, it sucks and hope.
Yeah.
But as things get down, things will get better and things will change, and you never know how things might change in the future. China and Taiwan have been at odds since 1949. So 1950. And it's something that it's been around here for 80 plus, almost coming up on 80 years. At some point, you just have to live your life. And I try to balance it, and I say, living in Taiwan, and I won't live in Taiwan forever. I gotta, sometimes I'll probably have to move to the United States soon to raise a family and all that, to be back with my family. But it's like, I always say living in Taiwan is a balance between two things. One is like this existential sort of risk, right? That, could happen, not happen, very unlikely, still unlikely. Whereas but on day-to-day life, very comfortable. Life in Taiwan on a day-to-day basis is amazing, except for the weather. But it's amazing to live here. Days run by, right? Where in other countries where you might not have this existential risk, but life is very difficult. Life, it's a lot of strain, a lot of stress, and a lot of financial problems. And I think it's not very convenient. You have to strike a balance, and that's generally how kind of I couch the decision. But I recognize a lot of people are worried, and a lot of people are concerned, and I think that's the consequences are unthinkable.
Yeah, you forgot food as well.
The food is amazing.
It's incredible.
I used to be a lot skinnier.
That's the reason why you put on weight, mate.
Morris Chang said something really interesting about the fab being built in Arizona and TSMC. Right. About how American engineers won't be able to handle it. Right. Or I think he called them baby engineers or something like that.
Right.
Is that true?
I think the thing you need to say about Morris Chang is that he's a 93-year-old old man who kind of grew up amidst war, right? And when you talk to 80-plus year old grandpas who grew up in very difficult life, and they saw their whole family, struggle and through war and all that, they're gonna have takes. They're gonna have some really hot takes about people who didn't do that. I think what is true is that there are difficulties in hiring for the Arizona fab. And I think that's something that is a learning curve that they're going to have to climb. And I think they'll eventually get there. I think what will happen is a mix of two things. There's going to be some loosening of what TSMC does, right? They're pushing and all that. But the other side is that they need to hire better people, or people not better, but they need to hire better in terms of training people and getting people on board and finding the right people to bring on who have a certain attitude. I've suggested to people that they should hire out of the military, right, of veterans. It's the cultures are very much the same. I think the risk is that the risk that everyone talks about is that here, especially in Taiwan, is that it dilutes what makes TSMC special, right? Dilutes the ruthlessness that helped them become number one in the industry, which is a problem because obviously right now you're facing a company who's also very hungry and very super hungry and super poor, which is SMIC, and the guys over at Huawei in the mainland, right? They have everything, and they even people within TSMC regularly acknowledge that they have concern that that TSMC will be overtaken or caught up to by the mainlanders, because the mainlanders are poor, and they have the intense, incredible motivation to work 24 hours to do all that TSMC used to be able to do, but no longer can or has been diluted away.
You got fed well.
Yep. When you're fed well, I mean, when you're not hungry, you don't work as hard.
Complacent.
Right? Complacency.
Do you think DeepSeek was legit, the story?
I think aspects of the story are legitimate. I think what everyone was said was about the story, everything that was said about the story or circulated about the story is probably not true. $12 million or whatever. Who cares about that? But I think but the thing that is essential about it that is true is that the Chinese people, the people of mainland China, are extremely hungry. They're extremely, extremely hungry, extremely poor. They're extremely smart. And I think when you put all those ingredients together to a pot and let them cook, I think there's something really intimidating about that. They'll make incredible advances. And I don't think AI models are going to stop. It's going to stop at AI models. It'll go everywhere. Like the EV industry, for example. I think the plane industry is next. I think all of these are going to go. I think you're going to see these. You're going to see the Chinese everywhere. They're so hungry. They're so poor, and they're so hungry. It's amazing.
Someone said to me a really funny joke the other day. He said, God made Adam and Eve and everything else is made in China.
I like that.
Yeah. Tips for aspiring tech communicators. Jon, you've been successful in this game and you're continuing going on a good rate at the moment. What advice would you give to creators out there who want to cover more complex, deep tech topics while keeping content accessible and accurate?
I think it's like you really need to put in the work, and I think you also need to be consistent, right? Like we talked about earlier, right? If you stop posting and you stop releasing, I think people, it's sad to say, but it's like you sort of fall out of relevancy.
Yeah.
I don't think I did better work. Well, this is how I say it. I've seen other YouTubers and other podcasters make incredible work, and then they do one, or they do two, or they do two or three or something. I think consistency is more important than like the actual quality of one particular work over the others. It's about making a process and making having a lasting interest in continuing to grind for years. And it helps to really enjoy it. I put my head down 8 years ago, and now I'm like, wow, it's 2025, and I've been doing this for 8 years, and I have 700 videos done. It's kind of crazy, but it's like, it's one of those, that's the only tip I can give to people, which is like, you have to really, really be consistent.
Yeah. Execution beats perfection, they say.
Yeah. And that's it's just kind of like a simplification of boiling down. But the reality is that you also understand that behind that also means having a system, making sacrifice, but also doing a lot of like processes to help you do what you do better. Always having improvement.
Okay. Jon, we've approached the end of this podcast. It's been remarkable. I'd like to end it with like some rapid fire rounds and one surprise question.
Sure.
So, Silicon Valley or Taipei?
Taipei.
Woo! One book you would recommend to everyone?
Chip War by Chris Miller.
Actually, I wanted to talk to you about that.
But it's a quick fire question.
Yeah, it's a shame. I really wanted to talk to you about that book in specifically because, it's a very interesting. But there's not many books like it out there, right?
Yeah.
But some people say it's a very focused view that neglects what China did for semiconductor manufacturing. Very Americanized focused.
Well, I would say to that is that who invented the transistor?
Fair.
And who invented the integrated circuit?
Fair.
Who invented DRAM?
Fair. It all came out of the United States of America.
Right. Who invented photolithography?
USA. Yeah.
I think the story of semiconductors is an American story. It's an American story in the sense that, like, a lot of it came from the last 67 years. It starts in the United States. There are stories to be told in Europe. There's stories to be told in Britain. There's stories to be told about certain technologies that may have been looked at as part of, that may have been wrapped up in the general sort of flow.
Yeah.
But the heart of it, it's always been, the trunk has always been in the United States. And it's not like I'm trying to be, not trying to like thump American chest or being like eagle or everything like that. But I'm just being like, generally, these stories have been American, but like, obviously, China will have a play in this story. We'll have a thing to write in this story, and I think that's just like we're all looking forward. I think everyone is bracing or excited for that. What the chapter will be.
It was a historical focus type of book rather than focusing on the present, right?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your first job ever?
I did phone calls. I did cold calls for a sales company.
Sales guy? Wow.
Unpaid.
Unpaid? Wow. Commission only?
Commission only.
Wow. That describes your resilience and persistence, my friend.
And also inability to talk to people.
Yes, it definitely gets you outside the comfort zone. Script writing or editing, which one's harder?
Editing by far.
Favorite semiconductor company?
MOSTEC.
Really? Well, I have to say why. I can't jump to the next question. Why?
MOSTEC is a super fun company. Super fun. It's just, how they started, where they kind of spun off from Texas Instruments, the advancements they made in DRAM. And it's kind of like a lot of people are really passionate about that company, even though they're long gone. But it's they're one of my favorites.
Wow, that is cool. Moore's Law, dead, alive, or zombie?
Moore's Law is dead. It's dead.
China's chip future in one word.
Burgeoning.
Most exciting emerging tech in your view?
Reverse materials development from artificial intelligence.
Wow. But that's going to be life changing.
Yeah. It's going to be fascinating. I think when you read about how much of these chemicals and these materials are produced, it's kind of like a lot of this doesn't make any. It's all just they're just throwing darts on the.
Yeah.
Imagine if you didn't throw darts. Instead, you went backwards from what you actually wanted to make and what you actually need, and then they say, "Hey, this is what you actually need." I think so much of the resist technology is basically like happened to be popular because this guy next door was using it for something else. Chemicals is crazy.
Materials science is just it's incredible. It's mind-boggling. Most surprising country your viewers are from?
I have a lot of viewers from Bulgaria.
Bulgaria.
Did a video about the Bulgarian computer industry a couple years back, and like they've really stuck around.
Wow, that is unique. RISC-V or ARM?
Pass.
You
don't want to piss off.
No. They're both cool. You can say,
Both made.
Funniest viewer comment you've ever received?
Oh my gosh, I only remember the mean ones. I'm gonna go back to the Gemini one.
It's a Gemini one.
The Gemini, they think that the one that thinks I did a video that I didn't do.
One misconception people have about your channel.
I know how to pronounce DRAM. It's like I called it DRAM because my father called it DRAM.
Really?
And my father called me and said, "Knock it off." So I say DRAM.
It was so funny. There was one presentation that was done in our event, and I was reading one of the topics, and I was like, and it was like, what is the challenges of scown? I was like, scown. And then everyone just started laughing. And I was just like, what's the problem? I just said scown. He was like, no, scandium, aluminium, nitride is what I was going to say. I was like, oops. And that was actually how I had to learn. I remember like during chemistry, it was like that. The way I learned the periodic table was just reading everything like Helibibni, Knofni, Namgal, Sips, Clark, and so on and so forth. Personal taste, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Oof. Hiking or editing?
Hiking.
If Asianometry had a mascot, what would it be?
It would be the deer.
The deer, yes. What's playing on your Spotify right now?
Sinners, the Will Ye Lassie Come or Go.
Look at that. One thing you can't live without.
My iPhone. I use it all the time. I edit on the phone sometimes.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it that good?
No, but it's like that's how kind of like, I'm always traveling about, and you always have to be working. So I'm always working. I'm editing. I'm making videos. I'm researching. I do that mostly. I can do 80% of that from the phone.
Okay.
Because, that's how life is.
So we have a tradition on the podcast where the last person leaves a question for the next person.
Sure.
The question was left for you is, would you take either SpaceX or Blue Origin to space, and why?
Oh, SpaceX, man. Like, they make the machine that makes the machine, and they have. I love watching those videos. I mean, I love watching. I would never fly to space. Like, trust me, I'm not that casual. But like, I have heights. Like, I have height issues. Like, I can't even. This scares me too.
Your knees are shaking.
Yeah, I'm terrified. But like, if I didn't have that, I would take SpaceX. I think there's something that's really cool. I love it.
Fair play. Jon, it's been an absolute honor and pleasure to have you on the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast. Is there anything that you'd like the listeners to know about Asianometry's purpose or the broader importance of understanding semiconductors and history combined in one, or whatever it may be?
I mean, just like, I hope they just enjoy. I hope they watch and they listen. I hope they know that there's no team. It's really just me. So I try to be authentic to who I am, and that's authenticity is, I hope, the way I can connect with people.
Yeah. What can we do as an industry to support you?
Just do cool stuff, and then I'll find out. Maybe if I email you, respond.
Yeah.
That is the hardest thing.
That's one thing I respect about you so much. I mean, I can get access of anybody. I had dinner with Jensen in December. It's not a challenge, but one which is actually quite interesting is that when I messaged you out of the blue, maybe a couple of years ago or whatnot, and you responded instantly, like, are you like that with everyone, or are you like, are you cautious about who reaches out to you as well?
I am very cautious.
Okay.
I'm very, very picky about. I always try to respond to people because I know what it's like to be ignored. I try to respond within a day. In your case, I thought it was really special, and I wanted to make sure that you knew that I was on board. And then when you reached out years later, I think it's like a year plus later.
Yes.
I was like, well, let's do this. I'm excited.
It's an honor, really. So very grateful. Jon, thank you so much, and keep doing what you do. Your work is incredible. From my side, I appreciate it, and I know there's going to be several new subscribers jumping on your show, and they'll be very appreciative. And whatever I can do within the semiconductor ecosystem with the top guys in the industry, if you need any help, let me know.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Have a good
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Salah Nasrian. If you want to reach out to Jon, I don't think he has LinkedIn, but you can subscribe to his YouTube channel right here down below. And other than that, remember, it takes a village to raise a chip. So keep supporting, and take care for now, and see you at the next episode. Bye for now.